I'm Mark Seifter.
And I'm Linda Zeiss Palmer.
And this is Arcane Mark. Hello!
Hi, welcome to Arcane Mark.
Welcome to Arcane Mark, GM Tools running Hexploration. Today we're going to talk about some advanced tips to run an extremely fun Hexploration adventure campaign, whether it's a single session or the entire thing. We're going to put together our experience, both from, working at Paizo and Linda's, ridiculously deluxe Kingmaker adventure that has so many things added to it, and the Hexploration that you basically added an entire hex map filled with stuff and more.
Let's start by talking about, what is Hexploration? Hexploration is a subsystem in Pathfinder, but it also can more generally represent the idea of exploring over large areas using with this it's typically a hex-based map, so hex exploration,
yes.
Hexploration.
It exists across many game systems.
Yeah.
All the way back to, the old days of classic game
I don't know
systems.
if they always used hexes in that, but
they pretty much did because
they? Okay.
Squares are a little weird to use on a map like that. But I would say, first of all, thanks for tuning in to Running Hexploration. Person who doesn't know what Hexploration is, this is going to be a wild ride, and I think you're going to really enjoy getting to know about it.
But I do think that it's worth mentioning, because I think some of the things that we're talking about here are going to have to do with, specifically the Hexploration subsystem, and others are going to have to do more broadly with the idea of exploring over a campaign that is doing exploration over a large area, and then some tips for how you kind of pace that out.
Yes. I would say the majority of our tips here are not going to be specifically about the minutia of the Hexploration subsystem from the Gamemastery Guide and GM Core, but are going to be more about the idea of Hexploration as a campaign, which could apply to any game system, including Pathfinder 2e, because the things that are in the Hexploration system, you should absolutely read it, but we're not just going to read the basics too. In fact, I believe we've done something where we went through the subsystems and read the basics in a previous episode. This is advanced tips about how to make it really shine. So when you're running this, we're going to assume that you have the basics down, or that you don't want to run the entire subsystem with all the DCs and other things that are in there, but that you're not ready for that yet, but you're instead trying to think of a way to make the adventure or campaign work.
So, first of all, when you are designing a map with hexes, in a lot of cases, one of the first things you want to consider is sort of what is the density of points of interest? Is it the case that every hex on your map has something that is interesting that the players can discover? Is it that, and some are going to have more than one? Or is it one of those things where, you're going to have only some of the hexes are going to have something interesting that they're going to care about? Generally, I found, and when I was doing Kingmaker, that it was more fun to have a situation where every hex had, something that you could find in it. Now, something interesting can really vary. So, the PCs in their group, they were trying to figure out sort of where could they find interesting stuff with auguries and divinations to Desna, the goddess of travel. And so, if you, then that had me thinking about, what does Desna think is interesting? So, an example of something that might be interesting is a gorgeous vista. And an example of something that would not necessarily be interesting is a small amount of treasure buried in the muck somewhere. Whereas if there's something that's a dungeon or an adventure or a challenge or something like that, then it's definitely interesting. So that way of thinking about things actually really helped me when I was doing the Kingmaker system, because then I was thinking about in terms of to be interesting, something isn't necessarily and this is a challenge and this is a threat. It could be a cool scene, or it could be a settlement with a unique flavor, or it could be an unusual animal or plant that the PCs haven't seen before, or it could be something that's going to help them learn about the history of a location, like a ruin, or it could be, there's a lot of things that it could be, or maybe it's a new water feature or a resource. It depends also on like what is the goal of your PCs when you're constructing this, because what they value and are going to be interested in has a lot to do with what their goal is. Like,
so let's get started by backing up a step from the details of like what's the most interesting thing into a hex and using that as a pivot point.
Mm-hmm.
How do you decide what the Hexploration is going to be about? What's the scope? What's the goal, like Linda said? And what is the overall shape of it? Now, Hexploration is well known to be one of the most sandboxy of possible campaign types, in the sense that theoretically they can go anywhere that's on the map and explore whatever is on the map in whatever order they want. They're probably more likely to explore things that are close to their origin point on the map than the ones that are really far. But you don't know, maybe they go like all the way around the outside and skip the things that were in the center that you thought they would go to first. They're also
probably more likely to, absent other clues pushing them in that way, to explore areas that are relatively easier to traverse, as opposed to, say, randomly going deep into mountains or, other dangerous locations.
That's also true.
So when you're constructing your map, you can think about sort of what are those natural boundaries.
So when you're starting off, the idea is, what is the hook? What is the scope? Is this your entire campaign? Is just there's a vast stretch of wilderness, there's a land rush, or some reason lots of adventurers are coming here for lost ruins or ingredients or whatever you have you, and then this is the whole campaign is going to be mapping it out, seeing what you find, what you can bring back? Or is it like one adventure where it's like, okay, we're doing our thing, but now we're going to go into a Hexploration because we need to search this area for like ancient ruins to find the MacGuffin that's part of the ongoing plot. Once you figure out what your scope is and what the PC's overall motivation is, and they might not need to have a sophisticated motivation. It might just be, we want to see what treasure is
There's
here.
There's another type of scope that I think is worth mentioning here, which is the scope of time that the PCs have to search it.
Yes.
I'm thinking about how in Quest for Frozen Flame we have one where there's some time pressure. Our characters are being pursued, and you can't necessarily just wander around willy-nilly. Whereas like in Kingmaker, you could just be like, oh yeah, we have plenty of time, we're like doing our stuff, we can go around and we can thoroughly explore every hex. So the amount of time also will help inform how much stuff you want to put in there, and like how easy it should be to like define goal points along the way.
That's true. So you want to know the time in game, the time out of game, like number of sessions you're going to devote to it, the number of roughly the number of levels, but it's kind of sandboxy, so you may not know that exactly. But in terms of like what kind of stuff you seed into the sandbox, you might be willing to put some really high level content in if you think it might go to high levels. Whereas if it's like, this is an adventure, they start at 3rd level, they're going to leave after 5th level, why did we put like 10 dungeons that were levels 13 through 19 into this hex grid?
So another thing to think about with that too is if the terrain is relatively open and you expect the area to last for a while, how do you communicate to the players and the PCs about which kinds of areas are designed for them where they are right now?
You have to think of a way to use different clues for that. But I think that is going to move more into the part about advanced tips for running. It could be a part of your planning too, with like where you place them, hoping that they're going to run into the ones that are better for them. But in oftentimes, no matter how well you plan to try to make things that are right for the PCs, it's actually going to be your ability to juke on the fly and use subtle clues during the session that is going to be able to help you to sort of guide them and at least let them make an informed decision when they decide to go to the thing that's definitely going to kill them.
Well, there is one part that definitely is part of planning, which is considering how the different aspects that you have are divided up by natural terrain features and how they interact with each other. Because, if you go in and you decide that you're going to, and you don't think about the terrain when you start, you might have something where it's like, well, wait a minute, I put this really dangerous group next to this group that's not well defended, and I'm saying the group that's not well defended to survive. That doesn't quite work. Whereas if you sort of do the basic terrain and the basic largest forces at the same time, you can make sure that you have like enough space between.
You want to think geopolitically about how these different groups and areas affect each other. especially if they're factions who have their own agendas. And when you do that,
you might accidentally wind up being like, "Oops, I need a town, but I don't have a water source for them because I drew the."
When you do that, if you're creating a Hexploration that's not just like, this is ancient ruins with ancient guardians and animals and nothing else lives here. If you have something like Linda's talking about of factions who might attack each other's settlements or things like that, they have their own goals and they probably have their own timelines. So you want to think a little bit about what they might do if the PCs don't do anything. So if there's like a secret group, a secret order that is trying to unearth like an evil lich's ancient relics, then maybe they're digging for those relics, and after a certain amount of time they might find them if the PCs don't go to that hex at that point in time.
The time scale in Hexploration is generally like a lot longer than in a typical dungeon, because it takes a while to navigate over things, and that also means that communication across the area is not going to be as clear. Like, you know, if you start a dungeon and you go in and you defeat everything in the first 5 rooms and then you run away, like, everybody else in the dungeon is probably going to know something happened within a few minutes. But, like, people aren't going to instantaneously figure out what you did in the other hexes, so you have a little bit of time and flexibility, and the flow of information is relevant, but still, like, if you sit around, then things should progress.
That's right. But Dom TTV points out a corollary to what you said about the faraway mountains divide things, which is island chains are another way that you can separate out portions of a hex crawl if the different hexes are actually even on different islands. That almost gets into dungeon design, where the island chains can be almost their own dungeon, like the Archipelago Dungeon Heritage in the Battlezoo Ancestries dungeons.
Other things that can separate are areas that are known to not have anything too interesting and be obnoxious, like, oh, this is a giant swamp, it's going to be a trouble to go across it, or mountains, or places that are known to have threats that the PCs know they can't quite deal with, where it's like, well, you know, like, there's interesting things on the other side of the forest, but we know that, like, a cantankerous dragon considers the forest to be their domain, and, like, we might get attacked if we're crossing that area, or something like that. This just a sense that maybe, you know, rumors are a great way to let people know about what kinds of things are dangerous, but having sort of things set up to encourage certain areas, or, like, for example, in Kingmaker, where there's the idea of you have a charter to explore a certain area to start with. It can also be about, like, making that starting area very appealing in some way, like putting obvious plot hooks or other things in that starting region, so it's like, oh yeah, well, you know, here's better. And another thing that can help with that sort of centering is thinking about where is the PC, what does it mean to have a home base? And to what extent are the PCs going to have a home base in this? So are you expecting their Hexploration to be like a, you know, they're going to spend some time back in town, and then they're going to go out for a while and come back? Or are you expecting them to be, like, camping and going around? And that's going to have a big impact on how you design it from the perspective of like, items, access, and availability. Like, if you're doing a campaign where the PCs are not going to have any towns for multiple levels, then you're really going to have to think about how you're handling treasure. You know, it's a great candidate for something like the Battlezoo Monster Parts system, or for the GM to, like, think very carefully about what the drops are to make sure the PCs can get what they want.
That's right. It's especially true when you're talking about the fact that they can do things out of order. Is that even if you're like, well, you know, I put a good striking weapon in this barrow so they can get striking even though there's no town, they might not go to that barrow that had the striking weapon. And so you need to be willing to think about that and to be a little bit flexible. So there's only so much that you can pre-plan when you're trying to run, like, a truly exciting hex exploration. And you don't want the Hexploration necessarily to be completely static, where it's just like everything ignores the passage of time, nothing interacts with each other, nothing's ever moving around from place to place. When you combine all of those things, it means that while preparation is great, and knowing roughly the mix of things that you want to have in different hexes so that you don't repeat almost the same theme or have something that's too repetitive is good, there's some amount that you need to be able to improvise on the fly, or to prepare to be improvised on the fly.
Yeah, so this is where sort of random and non-location locked encounters come into play. You know, you can do things where it's like, literally, I just sit there in front of the players, I roll on the random encounter chart for an encounter. But, usually it's more fun if you can use random encounter charts as an inspiration. But if you have some ideas of, like, set piece encounters that could be in a lot of different locations. So you're like, okay, yeah, I know that at some point I want the PCs to have an encounter with an angry crocodile, but that could happen anytime that they're near water. Or, at some point I want the PCs to have an encounter with this creature that lives in forests. This can happen anytime they're in a forest hex. And then what you can do is, as you're watching the pacing of the game, if it's like, oh yeah, we could use another encounter here, then you can throw that in.
Exactly.
So if you have a pool of things that can be picked up at any time, then that's really useful.
Also, we're in a hype train.
Hey, nice hype train.
Awesome. So, basically, Linda's exactly right. When you're running a Hexploration and you're in the middle of the game, you want to think about the pacing of the game in a way where you're very methodical about it. While it's true that Hexploration is by far the most sandboxy, and the PCs are going to dictate much of the pace by what they decide to explore, if they're taking it easy, if they want to go do downtime. If you don't have a pressing doomsday clock, they can. They can just take some time off to retrain, or even just like craft or carouse, whatever they want. But in terms of session timing, you, the GM, are the one who is figuring out how the sessions begin and end. And it's very important in hex crawls, in Hexploration, to think about where the sessions begin and end to help keep it exciting, to help keep people hooked and being like, yes, I really want to see what's happening next time. And to do that, you can take use, like Linda said, of pseudo-random encounters, which are encounters that are kind of random. Maybe you even rolled them randomly in advance, but that you stuck in your pocket and you pull out at just the right moment when things kind of got bogged down into something else. Break up the pacing.
Yeah.
And you also have the ability to see where things are going to begin and end, so that you can have a mix of different different modes of play that happen during your session. So it's like kind of a smorgasbord of a variety of different tastes, rather than just like the exact same thing every time. Like, you don't have the whole session that's just like, all right, this hex, okay, this one you see, and then you just describe what's in there, but there's like a little bit of mini dungeon, a battle, a role-playing encounter. By having some of them be flexible, that helps you with that. But another way to do it is to also be willing to be flexible with the timing of the session. Make it go a little longer or shorter. Your group might not have time to let you go longer, depending on how your group's social contract for the slots and who's available when and who's busy. So, but be willing to make a Hexploration session be shorter when it stops at just the right point. Like, imagine that you've got a little mini dungeon and it's these like strange fey spires that are found in the middle of the woods. If you stop the session after you've done the hex, you rolled out the hex exploration thing, the PCs they found those fey spires hidden in that hex, and you describe it. You're like, there's these mystic spires glowing with blue light and runes in Sylvan jutting out of the woods. And you hear an eerie eldritch song. And that's it for the session.
Like, that's better for pacing than, like, and you go in and then you start rolling some checks and you fight one encounter and then
you stop there.
Yeah.
That still could be good, but it's better. Both of them are a lot better than just stopping, like, near the end of the previous location, or, like, at a point. They generally can lead to more anticipation than if you stopped at a point where you were in the middle of logistics and you need to start the next session with more random logistics of like, well, we're buying arrows, and we need to get more bread because we ran out of bread. So think about it with Hexploration like a Monster of the Week TV show in your favorite series or something like that, where technically all the episodes like may have what seems like not very connected plots, but there's always like something at the end that hooks you and makes you think, oh wait, yeah, I really want to see what happens next.
Another thing to consider with Hexploration is sort of the idea of when is an encounter worth getting out the dice, because there are going to be some cases where if you're populating a living world and trying to get a sense of, hey, we're going over long areas of terrain, there are going to be encounters that the PCs can just stomp over that are super trivial, and it's just sort of like, okay, how do you want to handle this? And there are also going to be cases where you have situations where the PCs are fighting stuff that's really tricky when they're out there. So like if you go on and you say, okay, yeah, we have like one encounter per day and the encounter is low, and the next day we have an encounter that's low or whatever, like it's gonna feel really easy. So I would say that instead of being like, oh yeah, there's one encounter per hex or whatever, that you try to like have some hexes that group together with multiple encounters, or like it's a severe encounter so it's really hard, and then some other hexes where it's like, well, this hex doesn't have combat, or like it technically has a combat, we're not playing it out as a combat because it's not particularly difficult, so we're playing it out as a role play of how we handle it.
Yeah, like how did you hunt them down? Let's talk about using survival to do that. They were easy enough that you definitely win. We just kind of want to know how you went about it, because they're like 7 levels lower than you, these boars that live here.
Yeah. And
that is a great way to do things, especially if you knew the boars were there the entire time and the PC just came back where they were much higher level, and you'd be like, yeah, these boars have just been here. You heard about it from the old hunter. And
it's like, oh yeah, we forgot about the boar hex. Okay, yeah, now we're going to get some boar meat. We don't have to roll it out.
And absolutely feel free to have multiple things that are interesting in a hex. You can have something interesting that shows up in a hex that the PCs missed, either because they failed a check or because something else was revealed. Now, one thing though is if there's like a really cataclysmically bad thing that comes out of it, then it feels like bad form if you also had to be unfindable.
Yes.
Where it's like, yeah, a dragon comes from this hex and burns down your entire settlement. It's like, but we explored that hex. We didn't see its cave. It was hiding its cave.
Whereas if you have a situation, because PCs are generally going to consider, like, once they've explored a hex, like, it's a check mark, that one's done. But you can have a situation where, like, let's say that there was a situation in a hex that they didn't fully resolve, and they knew that there was ongoing tensions, but they left it alone, and then something there develops further. Or where they hear rumors and information that lets them know that something new has cut, like a dragon has been spotted over in this area.
Filling the power vacuum.
Yeah, filling the power vacuum of whatever. So then they can go and investigate, and they can figure things out, and they can use their knowledge of the terrain and the peoples in that area to assist them with deciding what plans they're going to do to handle
it. Even could be something that is theoretically bad that they didn't find. Where it's like, there's rumors there's a super hidden dungeon that's hidden by magical illusions where there's an ancient evil that may awaken. But just don't start with the evil having awoken and rampaging through and like destroying what the PCs have built if you're not going to let them find it. You can start with there being time to still handle it.
Yeah.
So like an example of an adventure path that theoretically you could go to the places to stop this, but they expect you not to, and even don't sometimes show you the hex map where they're on, is actually Kingmaker. Where constantly there are like horrible things that come out of certain hexes, and you're theoretically not supposed to be able to find them.
So there was a, to avoid spoilers, there was a major threat that is kind of assumed to wreck a particular area that the PCs by that point in my game, because of the way I was doing Hexploration, had allied pretty closely with. And so, like, there were some things that happened in the timeline where I set it up so they could stop, not the overall villain plot instantly, but at least, like, stop a lot of people from...
Because it started with... the adventure starts with the villain, like, destroying everything nearby. But we had gone to that hex before that part of the adventure path.
Yeah.
Found that there was a sealed villain in there, and then told everybody that there was a sealed villain in there.
And not to touch it.
Put like a huge number of guards that was like an entire squadron of guards guarding it. And it's like, well, in the adventure, it's just like some random explorer, like half drunk, like or whatever, goes there and opens it up. It's like, that's not going to work. There's like over 100 people here who are watching it at all times.
So I decided to have another powerful NPC who was around and was like a power player introduce himself for the first time by breaking the seal in a very dramatic way that all of the guards reported about. It was like, oh my gosh, and then that was like the introduction of the other villain.
Right, and then we also, therefore, reacted immediately.
You were able to react immediately, stop it, yeah.
We teleported over there, so the villain was not able to do their introductory stuff that they would normally do.
Yeah, because they left scrolls of sending with the people who were guarding things, so that if something bad did go down, they could be there in like 15 minutes.
Exactly. So, when you're running a Hexploration, make sure that the area is open enough on the map that you're not just doing gotchas where things that were off the map just wreck everybody.
To be fair, your group had a diviner and was really, really focused on, like, knowing everything.
We also had multiple communes.
It had multiple communes and had, like, sendings all over the place. So the Kingmaker group that I ran, really had a strong focus on knowledge. So even more so than a typical group, the idea that they had just missed something would have been really unfun.
That's true. But it's okay to have had them miss something as long as there's still time to deal with it. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you want to do what Kingmaker does, like, constantly, which is the horrible thing has happened, but stop it before it gets more horrible than this, then you want it to feel fair.
Yeah, so maybe, for example, the horrible thing has happened, and that's something you discover when you go to a new hex, is that there has been a horrible thing that is going on here that you can help out with.
Right. They just like to attack your kingdom or other kingdoms. Mm-hmm. And that's just a thing that can happen that you have to think about your group. Maybe some groups don't mind, because it's just like, that's the part of the movie where you get attacked.
Yeah.
That's fine. There's always a setback. Now let's break free from it. But for a lot of groups, especially if they did go to that hex and you just kind of did not let them find it because it's from a later idea thing, they feel kind of cheated because they put a check mark on that hex. I think they wound up putting,
like, much greater seals on the location, too, so that it was like, oh, wow, this has, like, a do not, I think it was, like, I had some message.
Or no, we did a commune to Desna on the hex where the thing was, and she usually just said yes or no for if it's interesting, but you can give up to 5 words instead if it's really important to the deity. And she was like, do not travel here. And we were like, Desna never says do not travel here.
Yes.
She literally traveled to a place that opened Glonder's cocoon and freed him upon the world because she wants to go wherever there is. Yes. So if Desna said do not travel here, we need to get all the guards and put it here.
Yes.
Or no, it was not even do not travel. It was permit no travel here. Yes. Desna never stops people's freedom
to travel.
And it's in the river kingdoms where anyone can walk every road.
Like been the one who like set up part of the wards and was like did not want them busted down because the thing that was inside was very much a thing that Desna did not want getting out.
Yes. So in that regard, you Hexploration. Especially when I said you want to be able to improvise during the session and not just plan everything out in advance in a way that might not work. It's important to play in a way that feels like you're playing fair with the improvisations. Pull them out of a place that hasn't been explored yet, or that there's a wandering monster that came into it or filled a power vacuum, not that was like, haha, you missed it. Unless they legitimately rolled really badly on the check and it'd be like, yeah, you critically failed here on some kind of check. Even then, it can feel bad to the player, so you want to think carefully about if you want that to be the result of the critical failure. You may want to make the result of the critical failure to explore more proximal, because then they can feel it. Like if they try to explore the hex and they get ambushed by something during that session, you can be like, oh, you critically failed. Whereas if they try to explore the hex and they critically fail, and then like
nothing happens
7 months later in real life and 2 months later in game time, like a dragon burns down their settlement, and it's like, remember
you critically failed
7 months ago when you were exploring and I rolled a secret check and I told you there was nothing there? Well, actually,
there was.
It was a critical failure that you did not know there was. It was a natural one, and there was a dragon that was going to burn down your settlement.
That you didn't notice.
And that's completely legitimate in the fiction and in game. It's just that it's cause and effect are too separated by time.
Yes.
And so it's better to play your Chekhov's gun from the critical failure sooner in a Hexploration.
You know, it doesn't have to be the same session. Maybe it's the next session, but you want it to be proximal.
Maybe it's the beginning of the next session where there's like, okay, we're going to those fairy spires. Oh, suddenly a red dragon comes out. Haha, remember the previous empty hex? It had a red dragon layer that you missed, and it's been following you. And it says, no, I finally found where those troublesome fairies were hiding. Thank you for leading me here, you fools.
Yes.
Or something like that.
Another thing to consider with your exploration is what is beyond the boundaries of your map. Because, I mean, you might be, for example, if your map is an island, it's like, it's literally water. Okay, like maybe you don't have a ton of stuff going on under the water. But if it's, say, you know, another country or things like that, one of the things that happened with Kingmaker when I was running is the PCs where the players looked at the map of the River Kingdoms and they looked at sort of the maps of exploration that existed and they were like, hey, you know, it looks like there's about another map that's down here that's not part of any of the countries. What's there? And so that led to, like, me creating another full-size exploration map with a bunch of stuff in it. Because I figured, well, you know, the national boundaries made a good place for them not to just go exploring randomly because they're rulers of a nation and them traipsing around in another nation's area. Like, yeah, they totally can. I mean, like, River Kingdoms, you can go where you want, but, like...
Well, I mean, Galt wouldn't have been thrilled.
Galt wouldn't have been thrilled, yeah. But, like, the other River Kingdoms are not going to be like, you can't travel. But there might be like, why are you taking the resources?
Why are you conquering this section that's my
part
country?
of our country? Yes, exactly.
Yep. So, when it comes to deciding where the end of the map is...
Yes, but that also means that even if it's like even if it's a softer boundary, like a national boundary, there can still be traveling back and forth, and there will be traveling back and forth. So
Isn't
thinking
that more
about
of a hard boundary?
I'm thinking more of it's...
Or is a hard boundary only like the demi-plane ends?
Well, I was thinking the hard boundary might be more like an area that doesn't permit easy travel back and forth. So like the water or like some forbiddingly high peaks versus like a place where you would expect frequent travel.
Fair enough. What would you call a boundary that's just like the GM says the map ends here? And there's plains to the east of this too.
The invisible wall? That's not really a boundary.
Fair enough. So I am going to be slightly different on this and say that while obviously many types of players are more satisfied if you give them something that's not an invisible wall, your group has a social contract. It is perfectly acceptable for you to use an invisible wall as part of your social contract if that's just the amount you wanted to create. You don't feel like having another kingdom right there on the side every time, or an ocean, or an impassable mountain range. You just want to be like, please, I just want to focus on this area. But part of that social contract is that you promise you're not going to pull like a pseudo kingmaker and you be like, listen, you guys just promise not to go off of this. Yes, technically there's no reason you might not have gone 1 square to the east. There's a plains over there too, but there's not going to be anything there.
Nothing
but I also promise
there,
that I'm not going to have monsters attack you from there because you didn't explore it.
Yeah.
Like, nothing interesting is going to be there, so we can just ignore it for the purpose of this, if that's our social contract. Everyone say aye, and see what people think. And if they're like, I don't like that, that doesn't make any sense, then maybe you can create some more hexes over there.
But I was thinking more about the potential of using those as interactivity rather than treating them as, like, hard boundaries that cannot be crossed.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So, like, even if they're only using, if, like, say the national boundary is a boundary, you might still be like, okay, yeah, but you're still going to have travelers and traders who come from the other side of the boundary, and then those can be people that you interact with.
That's right. So, the next thing that is also a very important component for exploration campaigns, but it is hard to think about when you think about exploration campaigns, very important, the part of your exploration campaign that is not a exploration.
Yes.
Because of the fact that anything, even if you have the coolest thing, the coolest little mini dungeons and encounters in every hex, it always stays fresher, lasts longer, and is more exciting overall if you have something to mix it up even beyond that. So there should be some moments that are not exploration, where you stop to take a breather. Maybe you're building a settlement, like in Kingmaker, that's a perfect thing to punctuate the exploration.
Maybe you're exploring a mega dungeon for a while. Maybe you have some urban adventures that you have in between your
You have to go back to report what you found, and there's like political pressure because of the fact that your patron hired you to go to this area, but like the opposing faction is against this in the first place. You can do that. You could just have events, even if you're staying in the area. There could be a weird event, like a strange celestial conjunction cause all the beasts to rampage. And it's like, okay, well, you could keep doing normal exploration, but all the beasts are rampaging. Maybe we have to deal with this.
Yeah,
first.
or maybe maybe there's a festival or a celebration that happens. Or maybe there's something interesting that happens with the weather that changes things up. Or somebody needs help, and the PCs have heard about that, and so they're going to deal with it.
Exactly. So some kind of unusual event that breaks it up from be like, yeah, normally you're the one, you PCs in a Hexploration, who get to set the pace, who get to decide where we're going to go, unlike in a typical adventure. This time, it wasn't all your agency. Not only does that let you punctuate and make it and improve the flow to be a little more different, it can also help to have a few of those in your back pocket that you're planning on using eventually anyway, but that also, if your PCs stall out and are like, we don't know where to go next, you could suddenly pull one of those out and possibly unstuck them.
Yeah, and having things that mess with sort of the slow pacing in a lot of different ways. Like, for example, you can have areas that are accessible at some times but not others. One of the most classic ways you'll see this is with, like, the sea caves where the tides go in and out, and so you have to go at the right time to go to that. But you can also have things...
Or the town of Brigadoon that only appears on a very rare timetable.
But yeah, having those on a longer timetable for that, where it's like, based on, like, certain rituals, like, these things phase into being, or, like, the fairy caravan only comes by, and the spring equinox, or, like, things like that are like, okay, this event is only going to happen now, so, like, now is the time to embrace that, and so there's some kind of a hurry to take care of it. And
right.
That also helps with the fact that Hexploration can tend to have a slower pace between encounters, too. If it's like, all right, if you feel that the PCs have been dragging things out or being like, we have plenty of time, let's just keep fighting this, like, one encounter per day or whatever, then having something where it's like, oh, yeah, there's this thing that's only going to be accessible for 24 hours, so how much will you be able to do?
And you could put plenty of different plot lines in there. And sometimes they will go along with the exploration. Like, maybe the plot line is a rival adventuring group or another kingdom has started exploring your area, and now you place this other color on the map that is checking out hexes. And it's like, what do? Do you confront them directly? Are you going to try to race to the ones that they seem to be going for? Try to figure out why they're there and what their goal is? Try some diplomacy and be like, you guys can have this one, we want this one. Like, it lets the players make a lot of decisions about how they want to respond to that, and you can have a whole event sequence that is based upon this new, like, intruder group, that rival group that's in there that leads to more explorations. Maybe there's a chase, like a long-term pursuit over the different areas. They may do a heist to steal from these people.
Yeah, if it's like a contest and the PCs are like one of the groups who's trying to gather the most MacGuffins, and like then they have to prioritize where are they going to go first, because the other groups might get there first. Or are they going to confront the other groups and try to attack them, or are other groups going to confront and try to attack the PCs?
That's right. Much like episodic TV shows where you, like I said before with the Monster of the Week, a Hexploration can also be likely to have things where you go to one area and there's like a mini dungeon or a monster or like a friendly NPC like who lives in that hut over there. And then like you dealt with that. Now it's done. Now you go to the next area and it has that. But just like in those TV shows, sometimes they'll bring back a recurring character, especially if it's not a monster you killed, but it's like the NPC who lives in the hut. So you could consider a festival as a good way to have all those friendly NPCs, like the hermit who lives in the hut, and the dryad who you helped out, and all these different characters might come to the festival together, and you can talk to them again, and they meet each other.
Yeah.
And it gives you role-playing opportunities, and to consider the continuity of the Hexploration so that it feels less disjointed. It feels like, no, this is a real organic place that has all these different areas.
Especially if your PCs are, gathering allies in different places, then having them get to see those allies again.
Mm-hmm.
So another consideration with that too, and those events, is that the PCs are not necessarily going to like bite every event hook. Sometimes they will. Sometimes they're going to be like, oh, we're going to do this other thing, or yeah, whatever. But those events will still happen in the background, and there may be some things to develop as a result of the PCs not.
Usually in a Hexploration, if you have enough going on and you have enough time to prep this, you can have it so there's not enough time for the PCs to deal with everything. So they have to choose what's most important to them and make put their stakes in on what's most important and let the other things progress as the NPCs.
Yeah, so if you have a thing where it's like the PCs can do thing A or thing B first. If they do thing A first, then thing B escalates to a harder version. If they do thing B first, thing A escalates to a harder version. And that can be a really natural way of saying, okay, I want one of these things to be appropriate for level 5 PCs and one to be appropriate for level 6 PCs, because I expect them to level up after the first one. Well, this gives me a way to easily augment either one of them, and so they chose, and it makes natural sense.
It can also be a fork.
Too. Yeah.
In Hexploration, more so than a dungeon-based campaign, there's great distance between some of the hexes. And so, if you say, yeah, the evil empire is invading from the west, all these squares on the west, and the PCs are like, well, we have those 2 allied villages in the northwest and the southwest. It's like, yeah, a wave of troops is coming everywhere. Where will you go?
Yeah, it could be A or B instead of A.
Whichever one you don't go to will definitely get overrun by the Empire. Like, they're not going to kill everybody. They want to oppress them. You might be able to save the people before some of them are sent back to the Empire as in servitude or something like that.
So it could be A. It could be A, then eventually a partial success on B, or A, then a lot of things, and then a much more complicated B several levels later because things have progressed.
Or the PCs might choose to split the party.
Da da da. That is one thing to prep for whenever you create that kind of situation.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's lots of possibilities because essentially, when you're running an advanced exploration like this, where you care about the progression of time and the space on the map, you're running in sort of in 3 dimensions, but where the z-axis is not one of the 3 dimensions that you care about. It's sort of the x, y, and t dimensions of time.
Yeah.
You're taking control of both space and time, and you're allowing them both to vary a much more significant amount than you would in another campaign. And that allows you to have a lot of more interesting dynamics that you wouldn't ordinarily see. So that's really what I wanted to talk about here, is to pay attention to what you do during the exploration and what you do that isn't basic exploration, such as things you've stored up to use improvisationally, ways that you interact during the course of the session. Now, I did want to circle back to what tips do you have for, like, if the PCs seem like they're going to be going to somewhere that turns out that the way that you wrote it was too dangerous. And this is assuming you're not someone who just, like, oh, they went to the Dragon Cave, so I've decided it's the right level for them. But you instead pre-prepared exploration. It's like, no, that dragon level 13, it's still level 13. You want to give clues that they can find. So maybe they find a charred skeleton.
And they realize that the skeleton's gear is way better than their gear, which indicates that it's probably a way higher level adventurer who got killed.
Like, it's destroyed and we can't use it anymore, but this is a +2 10th level weapon. Dragon slaying, too.
Yeah.
But it's completely destroyed. We're level 3.
This is probably not where we should be going.
This sounds terrible.
Mm-hmm.
So giving different clues, maybe they pass by an NPC who seems to be, like, hiding their cart sneakily and looks at the PCs and like, where are you guys going? Aren't you afraid of the dragon?
Mm-hmm.
What dragon? Oh, the death dragon from the mountain right over there.
Yeah.
It's gonna kill us all. I'm only passing over here this way because there was an
avalanche
that blocked it. I still think this may be too close to the dragon.
Mm-hmm. But you walking out there in the open, you're gonna get us all killed.
Mm-hmm. So, like, you can have NPCs tell them. You can have little clues. They could have, like, a bad sense.
It could be you can also have something where it's like
you sense a dark presence.
It can also be something where it's like, let's say that there is, like, a large number of monsters, and the PCs, like, fight one of those monsters by themselves and are like, whew, that was really tough. And then they see signs just like, there's dozens more where that came from in this direction. And that's like, oh, maybe we're not ready to fight troop of blank.
Or they fight a really hard monster, and they barely beat it. And they're like, it's weird though, because why is this monster here? It was running towards us, but not like it was going to attack us. And they're like, wait, it was running away from something.
Yes. Or like the thing that they fought is like a juvenile blank, and they're like, oh, we better get out of here.
What could have chased a creature this powerful? Oh, crap.
Or speaking of chase, making it a chase scene where they recognize how dangerous it is, and then the goal is to run away and survive.
The dragon is toying with them.
Yes.
And just kind of like blows some fire, and they take fire damage if they like fail in the chase to get to the next card. And eventually, when they make it to the goal of the chase, the dragon's like, and stay out!
Yes.
It's clear that it chased them off. There's lots of ways to handle it so that you don't have to just TPK someone, a group immediately. But think about that. Use all the tools in your toolkit to make it fun and interesting. And more importantly, when the big bad things happen, make it feel fair. So, like, they see that merchant is like, what are you doing? We're all going to be killed. And they see, like, the monster they could barely beat is running away from the cave. And they're like, let's go to the cave anyway. Maybe the dragon already left. And
then they check in there, and then
they check in there, and they see a dying adventurer. It's like, the dragon didn't already leave. And then they die. And then they're like, oh, he was probably lying so we couldn't get the treasure. Let's go in the cave anyway. Then, like, at that point, maybe it's okay if they get killed. Like, right? Like, it'll feel fair because they got, like, 5 clues that were, like, directly telling them that the dragon didn't already leave.
Or no, then you do the dragon chase scene and they barely survive, and they say, you know what,
let's go back.
Let's go back.
It said don't come back. That means it's afraid of us.
Yes.
And so, like, eventually at some point, in order to feel fair and to feel like it's earned, you do have to let them earn it, probably. Unless your group's social contract is that they just never die, and then you do zany hijinks. The dragon keeps Looney Tunes sending them away, and it's like, looks like Team PC's blasting off again. Which is totally fine, and there's nothing wrong with that. But in many groups, like, the social contract is that if something feels earned, then it can happen, and if it doesn't, and it feels cheap or unfair, then that's what causes people to get upset. So basically, this is the advice for running Hexploration, is to think about what is and isn't the Hexploration. It's the parts that aren't Hexploration that, ironically, can make your Hexploration really, really feel amazing if you seamlessly interconnect them in the right way.
Another thing to consider with Hexploration also is the methods that the PCs are using to travel over their hexes. What kinds of vehicles are they using, and what kinds of strategies are they using to travel, because those can make a big difference in how quickly and effectively they can move.
That's absolutely true. And it can make a difference in which type of terrain they care about or not. Like, if they're in boats, then being water isn't such a problem. Or if they're in an airship,
what
then
kind
the
of
mountains
resources
don't matter.
you want to offer them, or like have generally available in the region. For are the mountains that people climb, and there's like lots of mountain climbing gear, and like the trails are well trod and people know what they're doing, and there's some maps, or are these mountains, here there be dangers mountains and nobody enters them because
the impassable mountain range has never been entered ever. Yes. If you try to, you instantly die.
Another thing that's good to consider with Hexploration is if you have like great treasures or valuable resources or things like that are available, why have they not been found / claimed by any of the creatures that are nearby? Are they well defended? Are they well hidden? Are they something that the PCs value but the other nearby creatures do not? And when might you have a rivalry for a claim for something? Like that encounter in Kingmaker where like loggers are cutting down trees and the Fae are not happy about that.
Those are competing claims. Nobody's evil. They both have a point in some way, and you have to decide who you side with. Hexplorations are all about choice. You have a choice of which hex to go to. The PCs take agency, and so therefore causing the PCs to take a choice where they have to commit, and there's some opportunity cost, is in keeping with the themes of choice for Hexplorations, and can really make the Hexploration feel like empowering to a lot of players. So those were all of the advanced Hexploration techniques and tips that I wanted to cover. What about you, Linda? Do you think we missed anything that you used in your Kingmaker?
I think that was a pretty thorough overview.
Another thing to point out is if you really get ahead and you've made a lot of these events and encounters to throw in, you can even make a table of them that's your own table and then roll those when you need it. So
yes,
instead of only
yeah.
having a crocodile waiting, you could have 20 things that you pre-prepared. They're all appropriate, and then roll on that.
Yeah, that's what I did. I took the charts from the Kingmaker Adventure Path Plus from the Legendary Games supplement, and then I added a bunch of other ones too, and I found some more that were online and made giant charts.
Yes,
And
which
then
is
I
sort
used
of
it
a
to-
random
yeah.
encounter, but it's sort of not. It's a random selection between pre-planned encounters that are one-off encounters, which are more meaningful than in many cases than like a truly random encounter where it's like it's a dire mountain lion that you just
Yeah.
came
So
across.
what I did was then I had a thing of month by month all of the holidays, and then it started with like one random event per month, and then as their kingdom got larger, then they went up to 2, and I think eventually 3 random events that happened per month.
Yes, we had a lot of events eventually. And Linda came up with events and ideas and put them on the table, and we never knew what was going to happen until she rolled on the table. So I think that's it. Let's say goodbye to YouTube and then do our outro. Bye, YouTube!
Bye!